Well, hi there, everybody. Rabbi Leah here. Good to see you all. Happy Tuesday. It is a beautiful day outside, and hopefully, it won't get too hot today. I'm looking forward to some more temperate, temperate temperatures, some more moderate temperatures, so that we're not still in the heat of the summer. And it seems to be cooling down just a little bit. So, I wanted to talk to you today about Noah. This week's Torah portion is Noach. It is the second Torah portion of the book of Genesis. And last week on Chai There with Rabbi Leah, we talked a little bit about the Haftarah, what a Haftarah is, how it connects to a Torah portion, and so on. And on Shabbat, when I chanted the Torah, instead of chanting some of the traditional verses that we usually do, which are about the days of creation, I chanted the very end of the Torah portion because that's where Noah's name is first mentioned. And it's mentioned at the end of a very long genealogy that began with Adam and Eve, moved through Cain and Abel, moved through uh, Adam and Eve having additional children following the death of Abel. And finally, that they had another son whose name was Seth. And Seth was the progenitor, I think that's the word, of this entire line, this entire genealogy that eventually leads to Noah. And just to give you some context, what has happened is that the world has become once again a chaotic and horrible place in which to live. In addition to human beings, God has created these other beings that are not so good, and the humans are cavorting with them and having sexual relations with them, and things have gotten really bad. So God decides, of course, to that God no longer likes this creation. You know, it's kind of like Play-Doh. You don't like what you made, you just smush it all back together and start all over again. And it seems as if God is a little bit cavalier about his creation and about to destroy it. So Noah is described as a man who is righteous in his time, which is a very interesting way to describe somebody. It's kind of like saying, compared to other people, he was a mensch, which is exactly what the Torah says. And it could possibly be that Noah himself maybe wasn't such a great guy, but compared to everybody else in that generation, he at least seemed to be more righteous. So God selects him as the one who is ultimately going to build this massive floating structure in which he and his family and animals will live for a period of time while the rest of the earth is destroyed. And then we'll go on to repopulate the earth. So I came across a midrash, which I thought was great. And you know, I've used midrashim from Sefer HaAgadah before. I've been using this as a substitute for weightlifting during the pandemic because it is a very substantial book. But I came across a very interesting midrash for a couple of reasons. One, because I think it is illustrative of what the rabbis taught about consuming alcohol. And secondly, because it kind of introduced me to a whole category of beings which I had no familiarity with, or maybe only a very fleeting familiarity with. And I'll mention what that is. So, what happens is that at the end of this turbulent, horrible flood that decimates the entire world and everything in it. Noah comes to rest, and the ark comes to a rest. And the first thing that Noah does is he exits the ark after the dove comes back with an olive branch, indicating that there is dry land. And Noah leaves the ark and makes an offering to God. Now, this is the first time we hear in the Torah of any kind of sacrificial offering being made. In fact, up until this point, human beings were believed to have been vegetarian. And so it's the first time we hear of an actual animal sacrifice being made and then consumed. Of course, there is then a rainbow, a keshet, that appears in the sky, the first time we ever hear of a rainbow. And the covenant, the brit between man and between God and human beings, God's promise that God will never again destroy the earth. And so then Noah plants a vine, a grapevine. And as we all know, grapes take a while to grow. You don't harvest them immediately and crush them immediately and have them ferment immediately and make wine right away. But that all seems to be condensed in a very short period of time. So Noah makes this, grows this vine. He cultivates the grapes. He makes wine and he drinks it and he gets drunk. So drunk, in fact, that he lies down naked, and his sons have to cover his nakedness because obviously he's out there in the altogether, and for modesty's sake, they cover him. So this midrash, this story by the rabbis that kind of use this to explain Noah's behavior, is very interesting because it talks about what happens when one indulges in alcohol. And it comes from Tanhuma. So just what is Tanhuma? Well, Tanhuma was and is an early medieval homiletic midrash, sometimes called Tanhuma Yilamdenu. And what is a homiletic midrash? Well, a homiletic midrash is a story or a narrative that is used to give a message. I think that if we were to call it, we could call it a parable as well, although a parable usually has very specific elements to it. But it is a midrash, a story used to explain something that takes place in the Torah from which we can learn. It's homiletical. It is educational, and it comes from Tanhuma Yilamdenu. Lamed means to learn. So, so we are to learn from this midrash. So let me read it to you, and then I'll explain. When Noah began planting, in other words, when Noah began planting this vine, Satan came and stationed himself before him and asked, "What are you planting?" Noah said, "A vineyard." Satan said, "What is its nature?" Noah, "Its fruit, whether fresh or dried, is sweet, and from it one can make wine which gladdens one's heart, a man's heart." And Satan said, "Will you agree to let both of us plant it together?" Noah, "Very well." So this is kind of strange that Satan appears before Noah and asks, what's this? What is this thing? What are you doing? And he says, "I'm planting." And what are you planting? "I'm planting this grapevine, and these are grapes that you can eat them fresh, dried, or you can make wine out of them and it gladdens man's heart. Now, I want to talk to you first about Satan. So when we read about Satan in the rabbinic literature, Satan does not mean the devil, as we think of Satan when we hear it in regular nomenclature. Satan is the opposer, the prosecutor. And so there are many places in the Torah and other places in the Bible where Satan appears as the prosecutor. So, for example, in the book of Job, Satan, the opposer, uh, um, basically challenges God to say, I can find a human being who will ultimately give up their belief and their faith in you if we create enough misery and tragedy in their lives. So the whole book of Job about these horrible, tragic things that happened to this man in his life with his family and his friends and his health and death and so on is a challenge that Satan brings to God. So we're not looking at a devil figure here as we would in perhaps Christian literature, or as we might think about in popular film, that sort of thing. This is not a Lucifer, okay? This is not a devil, um, but it is an opposer. So we know right from the get-go that whoever this character is does not have good intentions for Noah and is going to possibly use this incidence of planting this vine as a challenge. And indeed, that's what happens. Now, I read other versions of this midrash, and instead of being called Satan, this guy actually gets a name, and it is Shamron. And this is the part of what I learned that I really wasn't aware of, or maybe I learned it at some point and just didn't remember, that this character is a demon. And I didn't realize that demonology was a big thing in Judaism, but evidently it is. There's a whole cast of characters. And I've heard the word demon used before, but not specifically with names and a whole genealogy. So it's a very interesting thing, something we can study at a different time. We know, for example, that angelology, the use of angels, is very much evident in Jewish tradition. But demonology was something that I had not really encountered in a way that kind of struck my interest. So let's go on with the midrash. Here's what happens. So what did Satan do? He brought a ewe lamb, a female lamb, a lamb meaning a baby, and slaughtered it over a vine. And after that, he brought a lion, which he likewise slaughtered. Now you might ask, where did he find these animals? Well, they were on the ark, right? After that, then a monkey, which he also slaughtered over it. Finally, a pig, which he again slaughtered over that vine. And with the blood that dripped from them, he watered the vineyard. Very strange midrash, isn't this? So here's this demonic character who has made this agreement with Noah to help him grow this vine, but he's doing it in a very bizarre way. Instead of watering it with water, certainly after a flood, there's still going to be plenty of residual water around. He decides to water it with the blood of these animals. And if you look at what he watered it with, none of these is a kosher animal except for the lamb. Certainly, a monkey, a lion, and a pig are not kosher animals. But we don't have any of the laws of kashrut yet. Although, in the beginning, when God says to Noah, take 2 of every animal, both clean and unclean, there seems to be some recognition that certain animals are okay and certain animals are not okay. Eventually, Noah's going to be doing sacrifices, and you cannot sacrifice a pig. A pig is not a legitimate sacrifice in Judaism. It has to be a kosher animal. So the lamb is kosher, and then the pig, the monkey, and the lion certainly are not. All right. The charade was Satan's way of saying that when a man drinks 1 cup of wine, he acts like a ewe lamb, humble and meek. So I want you to think back on your own drinking experiences. Maybe not recently, but maybe in the past when you were a bit younger and, having a cocktail was certainly not seen as something that was a bad thing to do. And maybe having one little drink made somebody a little meeker, like a lamb, and humble. So we are now going to go through this litany of animals and how one behaves the more they drink. So this is such an interesting commentary by the rabbis. And you can see why it is homiletical, why it could be used as a teaching tool in a sermon to tell people how they should imbibe and how they should not imbibe. So we're going to get more descriptive as we go along. Okay, so drink 1 cup of wine and you're meek and humble like a little baby lamb. When he drinks 2, he immediately believes himself to be as strong as a lion and proceeds to brag mightily, saying, "Who is like me?" So 2 drinks. Now, we don't know how big these drinks are. So we don't know what kind of a goblet or drinking vessel Noah had. But 2 drinks suddenly make somebody braggadocious. Hey, I'm the king of the world, and, I'm stronger than you are. And maybe 2 drinks is where a bar fight could break out. Who knows? When he drinks 3 or 4 cups, 3 or 4 cups, so 3 or 4 cups of wine. I don't know about you, but 3 or 4 cups of wine, I would probably pass out because I am not a big drinker. I'm a little person. I rarely drink. I had a glass of wine last night or the other night at dinner for the first time in probably a year. So when he drinks 3 or 4 cups, he immediately becomes a monkey, hopping about, giggling, and uttering obscenities in public without realizing what he is doing. So this may be the point at which Noah was when his sons found him drunk and naked and had to cover him up. And I'm sure we've all met people who, when they have a few drinks in them, get really silly, giggly, very loose with the tongue, say things that they may regret later, and so on. Finally, when he becomes blind drunk, he is like a pig, wallowing in mire and coming to rest among refuse. And so this is definitely not a positive statement about swine, is it? Now, of course, by the time this was written in the early Middle Ages, kashrut was in place. And so the rabbis definitely knew that a pig was not an animal that was to be consumed, nor was it an animal that was to be that a human being should behave like. And so the pig is saved for last, wallowing in mire and coming to rest among refuse. And the final verse of the final line of uh, this midrash says, "All of the above befell Noah." So it sounds as if Satan, the prosecutor or the opposer, used Noah as an example of what happens when one imbibes in too much alcohol and goes through these different phases of behaving like various animals, depending upon the level of intoxication. There are other places in the Torah where the overindulgence in alcohol is uh, seen as something that is not a positive thing to do. In particular, I am reminded of the story of two of Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, who make a strange incense in their fire pans and make offer it up to God as an incense, as a sacrifice or as an offering. And immediately after they do this, they are struck down. They are burned to a crisp. They're basically immolated. Why? Because they have in their exuberance made an offering to God that was not mandated, required, or commanded or ordered of them. And you don't do anything that God doesn't tell you to do. So it's an interesting thing. And then immediately after this horrible thing happens to two of Aaron's sons, the Torah says has the prohibition against drinking by the priests. So the rabbis make the connection that the reason that they made this strange incense fire as an offering to God was because they were inebriated. So there's a definite bent or a definite what's the word I want? Prejudice against overindulging in alcohol in the Torah and in Jewish thought, that we're not supposed to, that wine gladdens the heart, but you're not supposed to be a silly monkey jumping around, and certainly not a pig wallowing in the mire. Now, that midrash that I just read you is not the only one that pertains to this demon that comes before Noah. In fact, in another set of midrashim called in Genesis Rabbah, which is a book of midrashes, stories about the book of Genesis, there's another one which says the following: "And Noah, the tiller of soil, became profane." So Noah is referred to as a farmer once the ark comes to rest and once he begins to recreate life and regenerate after the flood. He is a tiller of the soil, and he became profane. He profaned himself and became profane. How did he bring this about? Scripture says, "And he planted a vineyard." So there seems to be some sort of judgment being made about what it is that Noah initially decided to plant. Because the Midrash goes on to say, should he not have planted something of use, say a young fig shoot or an olive shoot? But no, he planted a vineyard. Now we know how important, how integral olive oil is to to Jewish tradition. That olive oil was seen as a method of or a product that was used for bartering. It was something that grew in abundance in the land of Israel. You used olive oil for everything, for cooking, for lighting, and so on, and for offerings in the temple. And so it was seen as a highly valued substance. Figs also, fig saplings. Honey was made out of figs. Figs were eaten for sustenance, but um, the vine was really purposefully for growing grapes for wine. And so this midrash says that Noah, who was this farmer, tilled the soil, and his first impulse was to grow something that would get him drunk, as opposed to something that would provide a different kind of a sustenance. Where did he get the grapevines? Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana said he had taken some vine tendrils into the ark with him, as well as fig saplings and olive saplings. So you see the judgment being made by Rabbi Bar Abba, who was part of this midrash, who said, he didn't go for the healthy stuff. He went for the stuff that's going to get him drunk. And he set about to plant the vineyard. And the demon Shamdon met him and suggested, "Take me into partnership, but beware, do not trespass into my part. If you do, I will hurt you." So we have this midrash that is quite different in nature. In the first one I read to you, it sounds as if the Satan is more in partnership, really helping Noah with these strange ways of watering the plant, yet no threat about hurting him. In this other midrash, Shamdon, this demon, meets him and says, "Come on, take me into your partnership. I'll help you. But, don't tread on my part of this planting." So two very strange midrashim, I think, and that teach a couple different lessons. One of which is watch how much alcohol you drink. Otherwise, you're going to behave idiotically. And number two, be careful who you go into partnership with, because you could get hurt. And indeed, Noah ends up getting drunk, making a fool of himself, and behaving very badly. So there are just some wonderful, wonderful midrashim about Noah, what he did during the time he was in the ark, how he entertained himself, what the animals did, all kinds of interesting information that we can glean from this Torah portion. I hope that you will join me for services on Shabbat morning at 10 o'clock, because I'm going to be talking more about Noah, and specifically about something you may have heard of called the Noahide laws, which are somewhat of a precursor to the Ten Commandments, but still in practice today by Jews and Gentiles alike, the Noahide laws, 7 laws. And I'm going to talk about those on Shabbat morning as part of my drash on this Torah portion. So I hope that you will join me. In the meantime, I will wish you a lehitraot. Have a wonderful day. And don't forget, you can join me weekly for Hi There with Rabbi Leah every Tuesday morning at 9:30. I will see you around Seacrest this week. Have a wonderful day. Bye bye.